Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Greetings.
You sound sinister.
Indeed.
Live from a cave. It's Laura.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, totally different. I went to Mexico last week. That's why I was off. And
Oh,
we
nice.
went to Lucha Libre. We should do entrances like Lucha Libre. Didn't know how
Oh,
to.
yeah, definitely.
It's like whenever you go, you're gonna talk about something. You just go to an entrance. And like bam, bam.
I'll start working on my walk-up music.
Go on the third rope.
Never been to Mexico. Now Googling to understand.
It's the same as WWE, but Mexican
You know,
masks.
I can appreciate some of the folks I know who have immigrated from Mexico. They have some awesome theatric ideas. So I could see this being very awesome if they represent their fellow country folk.
Also, on the topic of global wrestling, this weekend there was like the Cherry Blossom Festival in Seattle, and they had the first annual sumo tournament there, and there were competitors who had come from like all over the world, and it was really cool. So yeah, I had some sumo right in my backyard in Seattle. So there was no walk-up music though. The entrances were pretty low key compared to what it sounds like you got to experience. So
Bunch of big dudes like boom, 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 boom.
yeah, there was a couple different, like, I guess sumo. I think there's like the professional circuit, and then like this circuit, they did like separate people into weight classes. I'm not sure if that's true in like professional sumo or not. Um, so yeah, there was a lot of people, so it was really interesting.
You know, living in New York, I should have looked and seen if there was ever a sumo event when I was living there, but I never did. That seems like a rare thing to find outside of Japan. Very cool.
Steven, how are we going to segue this wrestling conversation to be an intro to multi-cluster?
Well, yeah, it would be an
Yeah.
unfortunate segue into anything really. Suggest that something's going to be a struggle, but well, actually, we can wrestle with V1 Alpha 2.
Oh, okay, I love it.
Mike, but that's the last entry in the agenda. But Mike's actually struggling to write in the agenda right now.
Steven's just reading my mind here.
Love it.
But yeah, let's get started. So welcome everybody to the April 15th SIG Multicluster call. And Ryan's got all of the agenda topics so far.
Hello,
Ryan,
hello.
Yeah, hi.
So yeah, so the first thing I think I already mentioned before that, let me see, maybe there's some newcomers. Some of them I don't think, at least I don't recognize them. Maybe like, I don't know, Fireflies AI. Actually I tried that thing. I'm not
That's a
even
bot,
sure
right?
how it works. Did it work? I don't fully get what that note taker is for. Anyone wanna before I start, because some of them are already I mentioned that last time. We haven't made much progress in that KEP. Would like to get more eyes on that. Either have strong opinions or agree with that. I will fix those grammars or other minor format issues, but in terms of like high level ideas, high level direction, I would like to get more feedbacks from this group. Yeah, and if anyone would like to introduce yourself, I think it probably is a good time.
Can do.
Hello.
I can do maybe because I'm joining for the first time, thinking from long time.
Yeah, please.
Shall I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead, please. Yes. At least I can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you as well.
Please go ahead. Shweta, you're talking on mute if you're talking. We can't hear you.
Okay, I'll go. I'm on road. I'm Shweta Bhora. I'm based out of UK, and I'm part of. I'm lead architect in Booking.com. I'm thinking from very long time to join this meeting, but thankfully joining today. I'm returning back from office. That's why I'm not sharing my face, but maybe next time.
Cool, welcome. Anyone else? Okay. If not, I'll just continue this this KP. Let me try to share my screen again. This thing is, how do I share my screen? Oh, it's been there for a while. So this KP has been there for a while. There's some minor format issues, and the V1 of that one, I just want to clarify. I think our about API is still just V1 Alpha 1, right? We haven't moved to V1 Beta 1 yet. That's probably also opportunity to move there if we get some agreement, some other properties that the community can support. The docs is V1, so probably we need to fix the doc and also here.
Yeah, the KEP is in beta. There's still an open issue to move the like CRD to beta that's located at about.kates.io. The docs being V1, I think, is not like that's not correct. Or if anything, it was like probably written like aspirationally or something, you know, like in a high level way instead of being like proper to whatever the current version is. Yeah, so just FYI about that.
Cool. Yeah, another question about this is I think even that PR has been stuck there for maybe, I don't know, 6 months. When was that created? Oh, created like, yeah, about 6 months
Yeah,
ago.
can you scroll to the last comment? Okay, I think what's in the, I remember this needed like a rebase at some point, but that may have been addressed. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, last month.
I've done that. Yeah, so I don't know how to speed up some of our PR review or addressing things. But anyway, for this one, if anyone has more questions, high level things, I think we still have some high level discussion needed, unless everybody somehow agree with all the whatever I just threw out there.
yeah, I'll mention this. I've mentioned this before, and we can open the floor about this again. But I mean, I think people who have taken a look at this know that it has a bunch of stuff in it about individual properties and about the process of allowing, or more detail about what the process of allowing new properties are. I am very interested in the latter part of the, like, what the process is of allowing new properties in. So I would like to discuss that kind of separately. For the other properties, I think we need a lot more consensus and agreement of whether like they should be included, and then if they should, what format they should take. And I don't have a super strong opinion about that right now, but I don't think that we have enough signal. I certainly don't think that we have enough signal to finalize those. So I think we really need some more input. I don't know if one thing we could maybe do is separate out the property ladder part, like specifically, and because I know that's something we can talk about as a matter of procedure. Like that's something that like is less about having enough like use cases or like support, I guess, from like lots of different implementations per se of like what they should be like, but that's more like a jurisdictional thing that the SIG has over like this process. And so anyways, I'm really interested in making sure that we like agree on that process and feel like this represents what we think the way forward is. And I think in particular, the difference between a standard property and a core property, I think like I want some more explanation on what exactly you mean there. And then if there's any more like obligations, like if we're being careful enough about how we want to say will or shall or has, and you know, in each of these, like I think that type of litigation that has happened in the past for other stuff like in caps, that's the level of detail I think that we need to pay attention to this subset of this. And I just personally would like to spend some time as a group on that, either async or now or next time or whatever, as its own agenda item. So that's
So
those are my thoughts.
how about I split this PR into two of them, right? So I can start with, sounds like we can start with the ladder procedure first and then go over each individual ones based on that, the procedure. If, after we have a agreed upon procedure, then we can discuss each property after that. Does that sound?
Yeah, that's my bias. That's the order that I would like to like do these things in. And then we also have a structure that we all have at least agreed upon of like how all these other individual properties, like what it means for them to be accepted and what it means for them to have gone through the process. So yeah, but I mean, again, open to other people, but that's my opinion. Hey, Stephen.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to get the ladder property merged, and then really we need to follow the property ladder to add the properties that are currently suggested in the PR. Maybe we can add several in one go, but it seems to me if we're defining a process for adding properties, we should follow it.
Oh, yeah,
unless there's a strong consensus that there's an initial set of properties that make sense.
I lost track of who is next.
I think I was next. I just want to agree on what Laura said. I think splitting the PR, as you suggested, Ryan, is a good idea. The other thing I was curious, is the About API owned by SIG-MC entirely, or is there other folks we need to check? I mean, this kind of as an impact on the About API, right?
Yeah.
So is there more folks that we need to get agreement from? Because we, for example, if we expect the properties to have a certain format and like especially later we're going to have some specific names, is there someone we need to check with that it's right for them on the About API?
As far as I can recall, it is SIG MC.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Maybe Clay?
I just wanted to say, Ryan, I appreciate your proposal of splitting. I think being able to go through the property escalation would be very helpful. One of the thoughts that came up at KubeCon was possibly being able to start actually having cluster managers use, being able to have like a kind example of a cluster manager using the specs here. And I think that would be a good way to prove out that these are workable proposals when they're proposed if somebody shows an integration with a cluster manager. So I think that would be a very helpful way for us to walk through that escalation ladder once we've got it defined.
Yeah, I very much would be a fan of something like that. Like basically having a model so like and some sort of extensibility such that you can like prove that this is like implementable and valuable before we try to like adopt it as expected or core and really get kind of a kind of conformance or expectations around it.
I added a comment. Is that what this is? The suggestion is like?
Yeah, I mean, it may not be applicable in all cases. Like topology might be a hard thing to find a concise example for that we could point to kind of in a local dev example. But I think, where possible, I think that would be a way to show this property works for some use case. And I think that would also be helpful to make sure that this standard, like all SIG MC standards, right, are actually concretely adopted by consumers. Perhaps I'm too ambitious in that. I know I'm very new to the community, but that would be my my thought. And I'd love to be able to do some of that work. So.
Yeah, I think it's not just an example, but like finding a way that we can like implement in some sort of extensible way before we standardize, rather than trying to like put it in the standard first and then hope that implementations happen. That way we can be sure that like what we're standardizing like has been proven to some extent to be workable.
Either way, I just wanted to vote. I think splitting the proposal is a great idea, Ryan, because of the opportunity that provides us. So thank you.
I think next is Bob.
Yeah, I actually my comment is a little bit more generic as opposed to this very PR. So if other people have more comments about this, it's related, but it's not exactly about this PR. So if other people have comments about this PR, I'll let them go. Maybe Laura or Quarantine. I don't know if Laura, your hand is up from last time. Or
Okay. Yeah. All right. I wanted to say two things. One is that this PR right now is in the cluster inventory cap, but this behavior is very tied to the About API conceptually. And in fact, I'm coming with a bias already that I'm not sure is completely shared either in this PR or maybe like more broadly, that an intersection point between the cluster profile CRD and the About API is that About API is like cluster local representation of stuff which can be rolled up or replicated up to the cluster profile API so that there's like centralized data about any sort of stuff that clusters might want to advertise about themselves. I'm not sure if that connection is like totally fully made between these two caps or is like either amongst all of our minds or even like literally written down like in a way that is like across the two of them. So I think that if my understanding of that is correct, then I think that this property ladder thing to great extent also needs to be in, or maybe exclusively needs to be in, the About API KEP, like where it actually is located. And then I'm not sure if this was your intention of the distinction between an extension, a standard, or a core property, but I would also like to throw out there, like, I have an interest that beyond saying like this is a blessed property or this is not a blessed property, having something even more generic that's like whatever the requirements or expectations are of how much and how much of a in cluster local About API is expected to be rolled up to the cluster profile API. Like, I initially thought everything that's at a cluster local level of About API is like whether it's a extension property or not, that it's would be the desire of the cluster profile implementation to lift all of that. And I don't know if that is something like, said another way, if somebody made like 50 different extension properties that was like, you know, favorite color laura's cool implementation.com, and I gave all the clusters their favorite color or something, then like, even though that's like useless to everybody else, or like we would never write that in a KEP, that's like a standard property or even an extension level property that like we would consider explicitly being a thing that gets rolled up to cluster property. I think the idea that there is something that says, and that type of thing is something that cluster property implementations can roll up or should roll up or must roll up. I don't know, some level of that. We can debate what exactly that is, but I was under the impression of that. So yeah, I think that's coming at this from like another angle, like a more generic angle of like, while I do think there's a lot of benefit to the community and then possibly also to the implementations of elevating some of these to standard, even getting to the point where we all agree that any arbitrary extension property has some chance of showing up in the cluster profile API in a given implementation. And we also have some jurisdiction to say how strong of a mandate that is. I think that's a level of conversation that we should have too. Okay, that's my manifesto.
Two things. Yeah, one thing I think, yeah, definitely the latter sounds like should be in the actually in the About API pod more than this pod for the cluster profile API. Currently, the proposal is to answer your question here. The connection actually is just this one. So if you have About API and you put this label into this About API, it will be collected to the cluster profile. But it's just currently in this tab. That's how they connect it. Not every About API property gets collected. This is kind of the current proposal in this tab.
Okay, one quick follow-up on that. So can you connect briefly maybe this label and then at the section at the bottom of the property ladder where it says like extension properties are not guaranteed to be like supported by any cluster managers? What does supported by any cluster managers mean? Like, does that mean that they will not? Because I think the first part is saying they will be rolled up. Is the second part supported, meaning that they like do something cool?
Yeah, exactly. So it can be collected, but you can maybe not be able to do scheduling on. You cannot pick the color of whatever whatever
the UI won't change or whatever based on the cluster's favorite color. Okay.
Yeah, it can be it will be collected, but you may not be able to select. Or again, the cluster all these properties, at least again, the background was trying to help the scheduling orchestration part, right? Where do you place these whatever you want to place? Yeah, you may be able to select topology, based on topology, based on stuff, but may not be able to do some whatever extension. Yeah, that's kind of I will spell out this more. I think definitely I can add more there. But go back to one thing, whatever you just said, the relationship between the cluster About API and the cluster profile, exactly. I probably didn't spell out very clearly, but that's exactly the purpose. About API will be collected to the cluster profile so that you have a single pane of glass that you can do cool stuff. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, maybe one last follow-up is that then I think that that line that's like this will be lifted because it has this label. I think that's kind of like a third thing here that is also independent from debating any of the individual properties, that whether that's like the right mechanism for us to like say this is how you do it or whatever. I think that is its own kind of like agenda item too. I do want something to like be able to, as we've mentioned, the vision is to like connect these two pieces, whether it's that we ask people to put this extra label or we say anything that's in the about API goes up or anything that meets this conformance of goes up. I think those little tiddly bits of like what exactly that is, I would like to discuss some more too. I would
Yeah,
like it to be lots of stuff, but then I also don't want to, you know, if that is like not desired or we're at a risk of introducing like a lot of overhead in so
Yeah,
doing. Yeah.
Just one comment on that part is to me, it's really up to the community here. Let's discuss is
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
normally I would prefer adding a strong semantics, right? That if we do think the about API and the cluster profile API are coupled, then I would definitely prefer a field in the about API instead of just a label. Label is really kind of the last resort where you cannot touch the field. But if we put a field there, then they are really tightly coupled. I don't know if that's what the community likes. But yeah, that's definitely something I feel like we can definitely have a good discussion there. Yeah.
Okay, I will cede my time to Quarantine now.
I think I'm following up on that. Ultimately, is it the two things. One, I'm curious if the about API and cluster profile is slightly different consumer producers, and is like what are our expectations? Is like the cluster manager writes the about API and then something kind of picks it up and puts in the cluster profile and creates the cluster profile out of it, or is the cluster manager responsible for reading the about API and then writing the cluster profile? In which case, its own compliance with core properties and all that is not guaranteed because it depends on the about API. So there's like some weird stuff potentially in the flow to me. Is like, what are we expecting as a cluster manager here?
In the current assumption with cluster manager is sitting in the hub cluster if your PR get merged, if that terminology gets unified. So it doesn't really produce the about API in the individual clusters. So it's really just a role of rolling up, not producing those.
So the compliance of the cluster is not guaranteed because its properties from the about API may not be there, right? And it wouldn't be the cluster manager's fault in that case.
Right? That's a good point. Yeah, I don't know who is ultimately responsible to produce that about API. We have this about
that's
API.
where I'm going. It's like, who's writing this about API? I mean, we kind of understanding what's consuming it and replicating it to cluster profile, I think.
I think that there's a key assumption in the discussion you both are having, though, that I don't agree with. So I want to just make sure to understand. I don't think it's incumbent that one has both halves, right? Like my system, we have a cluster inventory, but we don't actually have anything local to the cluster. And I could see very easily where we could implement a system where each cluster self-identifies and a cluster manager rolls it up into an inventory, and vice versa, where an inventory maybe even creates the cluster, right? Like for those of you who are cloud operators, that inventory might be your source of truth and it might populate the information in the cluster just to make things easier for administration. But I don't know that there's a requirement that we specify which direction these things flow. Is there?
Currently, no, but I think it's on the table right now, at least from some people's mind. Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to bring it up, because I think that's an assumption that I'm not sure that I don't know what value it buys necessarily. And this is why I'm just maybe perhaps folks could articulate this. If there's a requirement, it needs to flow in one direction because it provides us a value. That would be really good to articulate in this proposal. And if there's not a value, we can kind of say, other than, hey, that's just how our system works. I would really strongly recommend we don't normalize that as part of the spec, but instead say, oh, it's possible one could flow whichever direction. Systems do that, but just do that as an aside for education of the reader more than a standard part of the standard.
One thing I want to clarify is when you say directional flow, what exactly does that mean?
So if the source of truth for your data or the initial place where data is populated is either within a cluster that is being managed by a cluster manager, or if the data is originally populated in a cluster inventory that's used by that cluster manager, and it's the source of truth. So kind of a pull versus push model equivalent, if you would.
It's cluster inventory is a read read property, read API. So it's not meant to be the source of truth. It's reflective. That part I think is relatively clear. From the beginning, cluster API is designed as the reflective. So it's not cluster API. Cluster API is more like declarative for the cluster. This is a reflective. This is the opposite of that, reflective. So it only collect what is already there. It doesn't dictate the cluster. So in that sense, I think the about API is the source of truth. The cluster API is a reflective of that. With that said, the real push or pull is kind of different. We don't care about whether you want to do push or pull in that case. Like push means you can read, the cluster manager can read directly from the cluster, or the whoever some agent on the cluster, individual cluster can push back to the up. That's the implementation detail. I don't think we have any.
I think I agree with the cluster profile is a read thing and just a reflection of other things. Then what is it a reflection of? Is it a reflection of some stuff the cluster manager knows, or is it the pure reflection of the about API? And then the about API itself, is it self-guided or written by the cluster manager as well? I think that's where it's not always.
Okay, we can discuss. Yeah, I always thought about API has its own. About API happens way before cluster manager exists. So I assume at that time about API. Actually, I don't know who is. Do we say who is supposed to create about API? Definitely before cluster manager.
That is also an implementation detail. So we only say what the about API looks like and what well-known properties must conform to, because they're used by other downstream stuff. But the thing that's filling in the about API could just be someone doing kubectl, or it could be a thing or not. So yeah, I think I think this conversation, there's lots of nuance in there of what I think we all agree that those things are not, both about API and cluster profile, are not declarative. They're not saying this is how this should be, and then can somebody do that thing? It's there's already reality. There's some reality, I guess, this cluster does exist, and it really is in this place or whatever. And then these two things are representing that information about reality in some structured way. The details of who or what writes that reality down in these places is not defined in about API. And right now in cluster profile, we're kind of talking about does that get lifted from about, or does that get lifted from the fact that cluster manager, sees reality for what it is and knows how to write this down or whatnot. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure it should really matter that much if we're only defining it in terms of who can, well, from the reader's perspective, if you read these properties, then assume they're accurate.
Yeah, I feel like implementation detail we probably will not.
Yeah, but I do think it's worth addressing perhaps, and I'm concerned about time here. So, yeah, I just think it's worth detailing in the KEP what flows we do describe in the KEP and which ones are left as implementation details. I also, something else that I'm wondering about looking at this. So because we have a requirement on implementations that once a property becomes core, all the cluster managers implement it, then that suggests that we need some kind of version on the cluster profile API, and I don't mean a version on the API itself in Kubernetes sense, but we need to add a version field in the cluster profile object so that readers know, and probably on about API as well, since the property definitions are tied, or might be tied, so that the readers know what is guaranteed for any given profile they're reading. But I think we should probably discuss this on the PR once it's split, because there's quite a few other topics in the agenda today, and there's still Babak's more general point to get to. Quentin, you had your hand up as well, but
I can just one-liner say, reacting to what Mike was saying on like which property are useful. I want to say from the GKE angle, I want to try to get a cluster profile with properties we know we can use for GKE as a way to figure out which ones are actually useful to us, and use that as a driver for discussion of what we want to get into core. So that's an effort I want to do, not only doing it on paper, but I kind of want us to also to have implementation starting to push for examples and help stabilize the discussion here up to not be too high level. That's it.
right.
All right, is that me now? Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know what happened to my video. I Zoom decided to shut it down, and it doesn't turn on again. But anyway, so I actually wanted to bring this point on. You know, you see this conversation, and there is a lot of debate going on, and we have been, I think, very, very slow in bringing some of these new APIs, etc., and standardizing them in the SIG. So I wanted to see how we can do better, or if we need to, you know, create a smaller working group or something that meets maybe at least once or maybe a couple times a week to go over some of these details, just focused on the API itself, to get this going. Because, you know, cluster profile is an example. Like Corentin said, we need to have this. We're building MCO. I know that Microsoft has built Fleet. Is it Fleet?
Kubefleet.
Kubefleet. Okay. Yeah. I forgot. Was it Azure Fleet? You something.
No, Azure. It's open source.
Yeah. So you bet that, right? So there are also a large number of similar multi-cluster solutions, and the number of them keep increasing. Whenever I search, I find some new stuff. So this market is getting very fragmented. I think it is our responsibility to standardize and have an API that everybody can work. It's fine if everybody wants to develop their own capabilities and different scheduling mechanism, etc. But let's at least have a standardized API, and maybe, I don't know, maybe we can also come up with some sort of like recommended implementation, etc. for some of these stuff. But I want to ask everybody how we can move faster, because there are a number of things. You know, in cluster profile itself, we still don't have a very good way of providing credentials, accessing the clusters, etc. Right? So that is a very key requirement that we don't have. I don't think we have a great way of providing some scheduling hints in a multi-cluster environment for the workload. So these are very key pieces that we really need, and we need to move forward and move faster. I think, honestly, I think this cluster profile should have happened last year. So we are already too late. How can we move faster?
Just before going, one thing is, I don't know, Babak, you noticed that we had the exactly same conversation, and the first thing we did was we actually now make this call weekly instead of bi-weekly, so that effectively speed up the cadence, like double the cadence. But yeah, go ahead.
Right. Yes, I noticed that, but maybe we should create a work group focused on just, you know, churning on the API and getting it out faster, and maybe use these meetings for bringing the results and discuss them with a larger group.
And jumping on what you both are saying, something we discussed at Coupon when we had some time is having some working groups focused on very specific problems, credentials, sync, scheduling, UI, user interface type of thing. And I think that's mostly it right now. But if we could have groups that fall on those problems and figure out exactly, like, propose a solution to the SIG effectively, have examples proposed solution, come up with a cap, so we don't spend maybe an hour talking about every single thing in detail here. Would be nice, and we can iterate faster as a working group maybe. So that was the idea.
I like that. Yeah, maybe we should do that. There are a number of hands. I don't know who's next.
I think it was
Am I
Mike first, Laura
I
second.
was
okay,
next.
go.
Yeah, I think it was me and then Laura. Yeah, so like a couple observations from having been around the space for a few years now is that I think one of the challenges is that we see things move faster when we have implementations that are like actively implementing these APIs coming to the groups with specific feedback saying, I need this functionality, this isn't quite right, this doesn't feel right. And getting those implementations that are truly invested in this to like have a presence in the group to drive the upstream APIs, I think is huge. Like the cluster profile stuff is only where it is, basically because of like Ryan and Corentin coming to this group and like working together to drive collaboratively these APIs. I think one of the things that we've kind of struggled with a little bit is that the like early draft of MCS was good enough, and then it kind of like stuck in implementation land without a whole lot of like bringing the feedback back into the upstream from the folks working on those implementations. So like I've had similar challenges in Istio where like there have been like MCS API implementations, but there's some like hesitancy and skepticism about it, but we're not getting the direct feedback from folks that are like working on multi-cluster things in Istio into like what specifically is missing, what do you need, how do we fix this? So I think like that's kind of like getting that feedback loop spinning. I've seen it work well in Gateway API where you have like implementations that are really invested in driving the spec are the ones that are active in the upstream meetings and discussion too. So like the more that we can get active implementations of these APIs to be part of the work of driving the upstream and to like give critical feedback even like if things aren't working or aren't implementable then tell us what's wrong. I think that would just go a long ways towards helping to like get the stuff matured and advanced. So yeah, there's my agenda items later on are kind of related to this of wanting to see like what we can do with MCS in terms of the like V1 Alpha 2 breaking changes and getting that through and also trying to make this meeting more accessible. Like we know the Karmada folks seem to be skew like APAC region, and this meeting isn't the most accessible to them currently, so it would be great to get them as well as some of the folks on Ryan's team who are just different time zones able to engage in this meeting more. I would love some of that stuff.
Sounds good. Let's go to other people before me adding any comments. So.
Am I next? I think I'm kind of going to reemphasize some of the things that Mike just said, but I think for like, at least from the perspective of like SIG-MC, like without people coming with their demos, people coming with their use cases, like these fragmented solutions like coming to the table, we're in like an ivory tower making like calls on everybody's behalf. The SIG's perspective and like is style the word? Approach, as we have like often advertised at maintainer track talks, is like not to solve the optional problems and to focus on the standards that we know work for everyone. And if we can only hear from a couple people, then it's difficult for us to make that push. Babak, you're being stalked. Ryan, we can totally see your screen.
Whoever's screen sharing now.
Yeah, Ryan, you're still screen sharing. It's okay. I've stalked Babak as well. Okay, but yeah, so anyways, I think like there's an outreach component to this that could be within the jurisdiction of getting those people to the table of that is like within the point of view of like the ivory tower that we're otherwise currently in. But yeah, I think in general, I think what Mike has observed is like that's just like emphasizing that point. On the topic of working groups, I'm not against it. I do think like as it stands right now, it will probably be the same people meeting more times a week. Will that make things happen faster or better? I don't know. But we can definitely try it without adding on the like this comment that I think is shared by me and Mike of like finding ways to incorporate more people, more end users, whether that's because they're like in APAC time zones or because they don't know that we're here or they don't want to be a part of us or whatever. I don't know. If we could give them a way to give us their feedback in a different structure, maybe that like we could then operate on, whether that's like surveys or focus or groups or some other thing I don't know anything about, then those are all I think options too. And I think at least based on the history of what we've seen might give us more confidence to move with speed than just necessarily meeting more times with the same people.
Yeah, and also just the work group is just doesn't have to meet
Sure.
often. It could be like let's make sure that we leave comments, we finalize reviews, etc. every like I don't know 2-3 days a week or something like that. It could be also another possibility or option. We can explore ideas. I'm not really hung onto like just meeting. I know that meetings are not necessarily very efficient, so we can explore other ways to move faster.
All right, Ryan, I think you're next.
So, yeah, so just to add that if you see my agenda, actually these are really along that line. So we have work API and we have, I think we already have a few projects implementing placement decisions. So work API is another one that a lot of projects has already implemented, and we are at the the thing is that whatever is in the multi-cluster SIG API is kind of skeleton of it. Everybody has more production, quote unquote, production ready version, because we do have customers that actually use them, and whenever they see this, they have comments. I kind of stopped on the OCM and Kamada's version and our version. We have a lot of in common. Those are all real world problem that has to be addressed in the work here. So during the KubeCon, we also discussed about actually make this one implementation, at least one API, and then hopefully we could even get it real implementing. Because like apples and linkings, we talk to them. They are like, if they have something like this, they don't have to reinvent the wheel or pick one of our implementations. So yeah, I completely agree. Our domain is super fragmented. Actually, by the day, every time you see every KubeCon, you see more and more talks. Everybody's doing their thing. Everybody's doing something similar, but none of us doing the same thing. So yeah, definitely. That's again the reason we moved this from a bi-weekly into weekly. Hopefully, I think we are at the right direction. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And I really appreciate what you're doing. You're, of course, one of our runners in the front of everybody, and I really appreciate that. And but just my point is that we should all, as a community, get together and act on it so that we can move faster. That's all. That's all. I'm not questioning anything, to be clear.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's taking your points that way. So yeah, so as has been said, one of the ideas is now that we're meeting weekly, is to change one of the calls every 2 weeks to a more APAC friendly time, because every time, well, at least every time I meet people from Karmada or OCM at KubeCon from APAC, they're always enthusiastic about participating in the SIG, but the call time is wrong for them. So yeah, so Mike, you added that to the agenda. I don't think we'll be able to get to today, but that's definitely something we need to do very quickly. And then as far as organizing work is concerned, what I would really like to end up with is a situation where we spend more time working async, reviewing stuff, and getting PRs merged than discussing things at length as we've been doing today in calls. And I think part of that involves creating mutual accountability in some way. I don't want to make it so that people coming into the SIG feel burdened by it, but I would like at least the core people working on specific KEPs and reviewing them to feel comfortable pinging each other to ask how things are going. And one of the things that we agreed to set up as well in this call is to have a dedicated time in every call for scrubbing. So just to go over all the pending PRs and make sure that they're moving forwards and that people are still working on them or not. And I realized too that for most of us, working on SIG stuff is secondary to our main job. And so that's also part of the reason I think it's important to create mutual accountability so that we feel some amount of friendly pressure to go and make sure that the reviews, things that are waiting for reviews get reviewed and the comments that have been addressed are taken into account. And yeah, we've definitely seen in some cases having ad hoc working groups meeting more often for a very short period of time work quite well. So that's something that we could do. Yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts, my plus ones to everything that's been said before.
Yes, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you. I think that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, somehow I don't know what would be the best action item going forward. But yeah, maybe like you suggested, maybe just iterating faster on the PRs, pinging each other over Slack or other mechanism that would help a lot. And also we can continue the discussion over Slack as well if meeting is not easy to do, given that people are in different time zones, etc. Especially in East Asia, it's harder to meet. So yeah, sometimes just being aware of the problem and start thinking about it helps to just move faster and creates a different expectation that helps us move faster. So I think let's all be aware and acknowledge that we need to move faster, and let's find creative ideas to do so.
Yeah, thanks. So Ryan, you've talked about work API and placement decisions briefly. Was there anything more you wanted to address in the call? Or
more like just call for participation, ask for opinions, because we discussed briefly during the KubeCon. I just wonder if there are more, and the key is this is not a small task. Like get this work API really to a working status. It's actually a lot of work. That kind of along the line of what Babak just said. It's kind of see the community whether we have the reach, and I agree with Stefan. You said it's kind of our second job. It's not, we are all, it's not volunteers, so the resources and energies are somewhat limited. So yeah, so just want to put it out there to see if there are actually more willingness in the community to work together to get this to a state that we have actually a common API, or maybe some reference implementation. That it's kind of the Corentin mentioned that this. I really like that idea. This is a sync layer, right? This is an opportunity that we actually can unify that layer. Scheduling layer definitely is the holy grail, but that part is a little bit far-fetched. But this layer is something we are very close, because everybody already has that and things like that. So this is kind of low-hanging fruits. Maybe we could, if there's a way, if there's something we can do, at least this is easier than the scheduling part. And the decision, the placement decision, I already aware of several projects doing that. So that's another place that we might be able to have another API. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So I'll add an action for myself to ping OCM folks, Josh Packer in particular, to see if we can get them to join in and help push that, because I think that would be fairly effective.
I wanted to make a comment in general, like about the different working groups I suggested. And one thing we may want to clarify in the SIG is like the reason why we're exploring all those different aspects like scheduling, syncing, and potentially an interface and things like that is we're trying to make a little bit like a new federation in some way. It's the same goals as federation. It's like that ambient computing or that like abstract away from the cluster. And I think we'll have to reconcile that this is the goal. Like we agree on that at least a little bit, that there is an underlying goal here, and why we're doing all those efforts in all those directions. Yeah, just want to say that because like it's not for no reason we're trying to have all those working groups. It's like this is the ultimate goal. I want to make sure the SIG is okay with that. Everyone's kind of aligned. I think Kubefleet is aiming to do that. MCO from Google is like we're trying to do that as well. Carmeta and all the federation things are, and we're trying to do that. I think this is admitting that this is the SIG kind of like aspect, and MCS was the networking aspect of it, and now we're looking at the more scheduling aspect of it, and we're looking at those different aspects. So I don't know. Stefan, you're okay with that?
Yeah. Well, if it turns out that for real world implementations and uses, we need federation. So at least we're coming at it from a more piecemeal perspective, which I think is likely to work better than trying to solve it all in one go. But
Federation might have
mistakes. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, just federation might have too much nuance about it because that also implies like specifically the like kind of more cube fed model. But I do think like in general the workload placement problem is certainly a multi-cluster problem, regardless of what like exact way it happens.
Yeah,
I agree.
And bear in mind too that our focus is to work on APIs that make sense for lots of projects. So maybe we're working on APIs that make sense for federation without necessarily doing federation, if that makes sense. So work API, I think, makes a lot of sense for the SIG placement as well. And those are all building blocks. But maybe if there's appetite to do more.
I mean, what I've been saying is like the secret plan is we're doing all those building blocks. So at some point, a solution will emerge using all the building blocks and will be the solution, and we'll replace Kubernetes.
It will become sentient.
Whoa, put AI in it. Yeah, for sure. But going via the building blocks is key because we're so fragmented anyway. So I like that we're going there. And I think we'll have the push and pull between, someone tries to put a solution with the building blocks, adds a couple more, and we'll keep on adding building blocks until maybe we'll run the world. Who knows?
Yeah. The way I tend to think of it is that we should be trying to figure out what the APIs are needed. Well, where it makes sense to share APIs across implementations so that we can build consistent, so that end users can build applications that work on top of all this stuff without necessarily having to care about the specific implementation. But anyway, we're at time. So thanks everybody for all the great discussion, and sorry we need to punt a few things to the next call, but so Corentin, your last point about hub cluster definition, that's one thing where we should all really just be revisiting the pull request. So I encourage everybody to do that. and also discuss offline an appropriate time for APAC.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you all.
All right. See you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.